When I was an infant, I was adopted from the state of North Carolina. From the moment I could speak, I begged my parents for a younger sibling. And on my 6th birthday, they finally caved. They announced that we would be adopting a little boy, this time from our home state of Pennsylvania. Now, in the months leading up to his arrival, I spent hours in his room, covering the walls with hand-drawn pictures and making sure the house would be absolutely perfect for my new baby brother. Then, Liam was born. And in the days that followed, there was baby shower after baby shower, and all the while, I proudly wore my big sister t-shirt. I spent every moment I could with Liam. Even though he wasn't my biological sibling, he was my brother. I awoke one morning and tiptoed into Liam's room, only to find him missing from his crib, so I went downstairs to look for him. My mother and father were seated at the kitchen table with a stack of papers. There was no breakfast on the table, and Liam was nowhere to be found. It took me a moment to realize that my parents were actually crying. It was soft and quiet, as if they were trying to hide it, but they were crying. Young and unaware of what was going on, I tapped on my mother's leg and asked where Liam was. As calmly as she could, she told me that he was gone, that he was taken back by his biological mother because she claimed that he was her family. But he was our family. He was my family, and then all of a sudden, he wasn't. It took me years to truly understand why Liam was allowed to be removed from our home 29 days after he arrived. As I got older, I spent hours researching the Pennsylvania adoption process. I found out that it was an adoption statute specific to Pennsylvania that permitted such a removal. Simply put, this law must change. It's here that the principles of the Rotary Four-Way Test come into play. Similar to the questions lawmakers ask before changing legislation, the Rotary Four-Way Test asks us, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill, and will it be beneficial to all? But first, is it the truth? Now, individual studies of different populations throughout the United States consistently report adoption disruption rates from about 10 to 25% annually. Approximately 135,000 children begin the adoption process in the United States each year, meaning of those 135,000 children, about 34,000 of them don't end up staying with their adoptive families permanently. Disruption of the adoption process can happen for a number of reasons, but inadequate state law is mostly to blame. The truth is, this isn't an issue that just affected me or my family. The flaws in the adoption system have affected hundreds of thousands of families across the nation, and something has to change. That begins with Pennsylvania. Now that we've established the truth value of the issue at hand, we must consider if a legislative change would be fair to all concerned. In order to do so, let's take a look at the laws that are already in place. Now, one of the most highly discussed adoption laws is the time that birth parents have to change their mind after a child has been placed in an adoptive home. This is more commonly known as the revocation period. Of the 50 states, 40 of them have revocation periods of less than 10 days. Here in Pennsylvania, the law states that if the revocation period is 30 days, it was the law that enabled Liam's birth mother to take him out of our home 29 days after he arrived. Of course, it cannot be argued that the revocation period should be eliminated completely. Putting a child up for adoption is a hard decision to make for birth mothers, especially under the stress that pregnancy causes, but we must remember that a pregnancy lasts 9 months. A woman has 9 months to figure out whether or not adoption is right for her and her child. Another 30 days is not only unnecessary, but unfair to the families that spent 30 days loving that child, 30 days believing that child would be theirs forever. The 30-day period allows families to get attached to the child, therefore causing an extensive amount of grief if the birth mother comes to reclaim that child. The Pennsylvania revocation period as it stands today is unfair. Reducing that period from 30 days to 10 would not only place us in commonality with the majority of the country, but establish equality in a process that as of now is inherently unfair. Now, the third question of the Rotary's four-way test works hand in hand with the second. In other words, by shortening this revocation period, it would build goodwill between the state and adoptive families. State legislators can significantly improve the adoption landscape by voting to reduce this revocation period. Statistically speaking, if these flaws were to be remedied, we could also expect an increase in in-state adoptions. Now, the fourth and final question, is it beneficial to all, is clearly the most difficult to address in this situation. So what is the benefit of a longer revocation period? Obviously, it provides birth mothers with a longer time to consider their decision, but is longer actually better? In this case, No. Birth parents' decisions are more rational prior to the baby's birth, while those made afterwards are often fueled by emotion. A shorter revocation period would incentivize birth parents to think more critically about their initial decision, reducing the number of disruptions annually. The issues both my family and families everywhere have with the adoption process in Pennsylvania are true. They are real and they are devastating. These flaws support an unfair system for adoptive parents. Shortening the revocation period to 10 days would create a process that is fair for all involved and bring us to a point where our legislation matches that of other states nationwide. This change would build goodwill between adoptive parents and the state, thereby encouraging more adoptions to occur within the state border. And finally, a shorter revocation period would benefit all, the adoptive family, the child, and even the birth parents. Now, the difference between the topic I chose to address today and the others you might have already heard is that most people aren't familiar with PA adoption legislation. It's not something you'll hear about on the news and certainly can't be considered a hot button issue. But the only way to broaden awareness, to begin change, is through conversation, by listening to people's stories, hearing their concerns, and doing something about it. Rotary International pushes us to do exactly that, to make the world a better place. And while adoption reform is just a small part of that, it's a step in the right direction, a step towards creating lasting change across the globe, in our communities, and in ourselves. And that is certainly a step worth taking. Thank you.